Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the modern Amla Murabba. Sweet, simple, and fast. Look, if you love traditional, deeply flavorful recipes, but you're honestly a bit intimidated by the huge historical hassle of preparing them, you are in the exact right place. We're drawing on a brilliant time-saving method. We're basically going to take a process that usually feels totally overwhelming and make it sweet, simple, and incredibly fast. Okay, let's dive into this. I mean, who wouldn't want a delicious year-round energy boost to help beat the brutal summer heat? But ideally, without having to endure an agonizing 2-day chemical-heavy preparation process, right? Historically, making this treat felt like an absolute chore. But today, we're going to walk through a foolproof modern method that just skips all the hardest parts while perfectly preserving this incredible superfood. But hey, before we get into the how, let's briefly touch on the why. Amla, or the Indian gooseberry, is a literal nutritional powerhouse. It's just absolutely packed with iron and vitamin C. In fact, according to our source material, consuming just one single chunk of gooseberry murabba during those sweltering summer months gives your body the vital strength it needs to bear the heat all day long. So it's not just a sweet treat, it's practically a daily wellness ritual. Now, to make the perfect preserve, you absolutely have to start with the perfect fruit. When you head to the market, especially right around December when they finally come into season, you're looking for ripe, slightly large gooseberries. And listen, don't be deterred if they have a slight brown color on them and aren't completely bright green. That is exactly what you want. That ripening process makes them much less tangy, meaning they'll absorb the sugar beautifully and give your murabba that perfectly mellow sweetness. All right, so for our baseline recipe today, we're going to set our anchor weight at exactly 1 kilogram of these beautiful ripe gooseberries. Keeping this simple ratio in mind is going to make the rest of the cooking process an absolute breeze. Let's move to the next crucial ingredient and see how this builds. To perfectly balance that 1 kilogram of fruit, we're going to need 1.5 kilograms of sugar. This specific ratio is basically the golden rule for our modern shortcut. It guarantees there's enough sweetness to counteract the amla's natural tartness and enough volume to create the rich, preserving syrup that keeps our murabba fresh for months on end. Okay, time to get our hands dirty, or, well, actually incredibly clean. The initial prep here is crucial. First, wash your gooseberries thoroughly, like 2 to 3 times. Then, simply soak them in plain tap water for 1 day. Notice we aren't doing the traditional harsh chemical soaks here, just clean water. After a day passes, drain them, rinse them well, and, this is key, let them dry completely before you do anything else. Any leftover water on the skin can completely mess with the preservation process later. Once every single drop of water is gone, we need to prick them, so the syrup can eventually penetrate the fruit. You'll take a fork and dig it nicely into the amla, all the way around. But I really want to pause here and echo a very caring, explicit warning, straight from Nisha Modalika. Be a little cautious while pricking. If the amla slips from your hand, then the fork can hurt you. So please, take your time with this step, hold the fruit firmly, work methodically, and keep those hands safe. Right, so once every single gooseberry is pricked, we move to a highly specific 3-step microprocess. First, bring a vessel of water to a simmer. You want enough water to completely drench your fruit. Second, drop the amlas in, wait for the water to simmer again, and boil them for exactly 2 minutes. Third, turn off the flame, cover the vessel, and let them rest in that hot water for exactly 5 minutes. It's a precise, super simple formula. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, why such a short, specific boil? Well, this is the softening phase. We're gently, physically transforming the fruit. That quick 2-minute boil and 5-minute resting period turns the amlas tender without turning them to mush. We're perfectly priming them right now to act like little sponges, completely ready to absorb all that 1.5 kilograms of sweetness we measured out earlier. After this, you just drain them right out of the water. And now we arrive at what's probably the most technical part of this whole explainer. We have tender fruit, and we have a literal mountain of sugar. The big question is, how do we turn 1.5 kilograms of dry sugar into a perfect, flowing syrup without scorching it to the bottom of the pan? Because if we add too much water, we'll be cooking all day long just trying to boil that water off. We need a brilliant shortcut. Well, here's the absolute secret to this instant method. You add the sugar and the tender amlas directly into the pan together, along with just 1 single half cup of water. That's it. You turn the flame on low. As the pan gently heats up, the amlas start to release their own natural juices. Those juices combine with that tiny bit of water and begin to safely, slowly dissolve the sugar. Over the course of about 25 minutes of gentle stirring, the sugar completely melts into a dense, perfect syrup. But listen, I literally cannot stress this enough. You have got to be patient here. If you get impatient and crank up the heat to rush the melting process, the sugar is going to caramelize and burn brown from beneath way before the amlas have a chance to release their protective juices. Keep that flame low, keep stirring at regular intervals, and just trust the process. Now, what's really interesting about this next step is how we actually test if those 25 minutes of simmering paid off. We are looking for something called thread consistency. To test this like a pro, take a few drops of the syrup in a small bowl and let it cool. Seriously, never touch boiling sugar. Once it's completely cool to the touch, pinch the syrup between your thumb and index finger and slowly pull them apart. If the syrup stretches into unbroken strings or threads, your dense sugar syrup is absolutely perfect. You can go ahead and turn off the flame. Okay, let's take a quick but absolutely vital detour to talk about your tools. The natural acidity of the amlas means your cookware matters immensely here. You can safely cook the murabba in a stainless steel vessel, but don't leave it in there too long after it's done. And never ever use iron or aluminum vessels. The chemical reaction will cause your beautiful murabba to go stale and spoil incredibly quickly. Always transfer your finished, slightly cooled product into a glass or food-grade container. So, while that glorious syrup is cooling down just a bit before going into the glass container, we're going to add our flavor enhancers. This is where it gets that wonderful aromatic depth. We mix in 1 teaspoon of black salt, 1 teaspoon of freshly peeled and ground cardamom powder, and if you like a tiny kick to balance out the sweet, a half teaspoon of black pepper. Just stir that beautifully right into the warm syrup. At this point, the actual cooking is totally done. But the magic? The magic is just beginning. You need to let those amlas sit in that spiced syrup for 3 full days. This curing time is strictly non-negotiable. During these 72 hours, the amlas are completely drenched, pulling the syrup deep into their core and replacing their remaining tartness with wonderful, rich sweetness. All right, so 3 days pass. You excitedly open your glass container to admire your work, but you notice something. The syrup doesn't look quite right. Because the amlas release more juices during those 3 days of resting, the consistency of your syrup can sometimes shift on you. But don't panic. This is a completely normal crossroads, and fixing it is incredibly easy. And this brilliantly illustrates just how forgiving this recipe really is. We have super clear if-then scenarios to save your batch. If your syrup is turned out too thin, which is dangerous because it might spoil quickly, just pour it back into a pan and cook it for a few more minutes to evaporate the extra liquid. On the flip side, if the syrup is too thick and starting to solidify, simply boil a little water separately and stir 1 to 2 tablespoons into your murabba to thin it out perfectly. You're doing this quick troubleshooting because we are chasing an ultimate sensory goal. After those 3 days and any tiny adjustments you had to make, your syrup should be entirely flawless. It shouldn't be watery, and it definitely shouldn't be rock hard. The source describes the ideal texture so wonderfully. It should be as gooey as honey. When you hit that texture, your amlas are fully cured and ready to be enjoyed. So, the crucial point is really highlighted when we zoom out and look at the big picture here. Traditionally, people would drench gooseberries in harsh alum or limestone mixed water for 2 whole days just to prep them. We completely bypassed all of that. By just taking the time to precisely prick, quickly boil, and slowly simmer them in their own juices, we created an instant, modern masterpiece that tastes just as delicious as the old, tedious methods. And here's the best part. If you follow these exact steps, and always remember to use a dry, clean spoon when scooping it out of your glass jar, this incredible vitamin-packed superfood treat will stay fresh and delicious for more than a year. It's a total game changer for your kitchen and your health. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you feel empowered to try this amazing recipe. Which leaves me with one final question for you. Are you ready to ditch the 2-day chemical soak and whip up this modern classic in your own kitchen?